The hydraulic hiss of my metal shear cutting through copper wire was the sweetest sound I'd heard all morning, right up until Barbara Norton appeared at my garage door with a clipboard and an expression that could curdle milk. "I'm Grant Collins, and I've lived in Riverside Heights, Tennessee for 6 years now. My modest 3-bedroom house sits on a corner lot, which gives me a decent-sized garage where I run my small-scale metal recycling operation. Nothing fancy, just processing scrap metal that local contractors and neighbors bring me, then hauling it to the recycling center downtown Memphis twice a month. The operation helped fund my late wife's medical bills, and now it served a different purpose entirely, though Barbara was about to make that very difficult. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. I hit the power switch on the shear, and the machine wound down with a mechanical groan. "Morning, Barbara. What can I do for you?" She stepped into my garage without invitation, her heels clicking on the concrete floor. Barbara was the president of our HOA, a position she'd held for 3 years and wielded like a scepter. Her perfectly styled blonde hair never moved, even in the summer heat, and she wore a pantsuit that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," from 50 yards away. "Mr. Collins, we've received multiple complaints about the noise coming from your property. Additionally, the aesthetic disruption of having commercial equipment visible from the street violates our community standards." I wiped my hands on a rag and leaned against my workbench. "Commercial equipment? Barbara, that's a metal shear. It's a tool. Plenty of folks around here have workshops, not ones that operate businesses from residential properties." She made a check mark on her clipboard with dramatic flair. Section 4.7 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that no commercial enterprises may be conducted within community boundaries. I'm not running a business. I process scrap metal and take it to the recycling center. It's basically an elaborate recycling program. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You accept materials from outside sources. You use industrial equipment. You generate income. That's a business, Mr. Collins. I'm issuing you a formal warning. You have 14 days to cease operations and remove the equipment, or we'll begin fining procedures." She thrust a printed notice at me and turned on her heel before I could respond. I stood there holding the paper, feeling my blood pressure rise. The shear behind me represented more than just a piece of equipment. It represented opportunity, community service, and a promise I'd made to Sarah before she died. My wife and I had always talked about helping kids in our community go to college. When she passed from cancer 2 years ago, I'd channeled my grief into action. The metal recycling wasn't just about making a few extra dollars. Every bit of profit went into a scholarship fund I'd established at Memphis State University, specifically for students from low-income families in our county. Last year alone, I'd processed enough scrap to fund 2 full scholarships. But explaining that to Barbara would be like explaining quantum physics to a brick wall. I went inside and called my buddy Marcus, who worked at the Memphis Metal Recycling Center where I took my processed scrap. He'd been in the business for 20 years and knew every regulation and loophole in the book. "Grant, my man," he answered on the second ring. "What's happening?" "HOA problems. They're trying to shut down my operation, calling it a commercial business." Marcus let out a low whistle. "That's rough. But listen, what you're doing isn't really a business in the traditional sense, especially if the money's going to charity. You're providing a community service. The center's worked with people in similar situations before." "How do I prove that to the HOA?" "Documentation, brother. We can provide statements about your contributions, the volume you process, and how it supports the scholarship fund. If you're registered as a non-profit or charitable operation, they'll have a harder time calling it a commercial business. The scholarship fund is registered, but I never thought to connect the recycling operation officially. Then that's step one. Get your paperwork in order. I'll talk to our director and see what we can put together on our end. The company actually loves what you're doing because it encourages community recycling initiatives. We might even be willing to make a formal statement. I thanked him and spent the rest of the afternoon digging through files, trying to create a paper trail that connected my garage operation to the scholarship fund. The next morning, I drove down to Memphis State to meet with Jennifer Reeves, the financial aid director who administered the scholarship fund I'd created. Jennifer was in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and an enthusiasm for helping students that reminded me why I'd started this whole thing. Her office was cramped but organized, every surface covered with applications and financial documents. "Grant, good to see you. Please sit down." She cleared a stack of folders from the chair across from her desk. "How's the metalwork going? That's actually why I'm here. My HOA is threatening to shut me down, and I need documentation proving that this isn't just some side business I'm running. Can you provide something official that shows where my contributions come from?" Her expression shifted to concern. "Absolutely. You know, what you're doing is remarkable. Last semester, we awarded scholarships to Tamara Johnson and David Mitchell because of your fund. Tamara's studying nursing, and David's going into engineering. Neither of them could have afforded school otherwise." She turned to her computer and started typing. "I can generate a formal letter detailing the fund's structure, your contributions, and the impact it's had. Will that help? It's a start. I'm hoping if I can prove this is charitable work, not commercial enterprise, the HOA will back off. They should be celebrating you, not trying to shut you down." She printed several documents and slid them across the desk. "Here's everything I can provide. If you need me to testify or speak at any HOA meetings, I'm happy to do that." I left feeling marginally better, armed with official university documentation. The next step was the recycling center. Marcus had arranged for me to meet with his boss, Ronald Peterson, the director of Memphis Metal Recycling. The recycling center occupied 5 acres in an industrial part of Memphis, surrounded by chain-link fencing and featuring mountains of sorted metal waiting for processing. The main office was a prefab building that rattled whenever the big machines outside crushed cars or sorted materials. Ronald was a barrel-chested man in his 60s with calloused hands and a no-nonsense attitude. He shook my hand firmly and gestured to a seat in his cluttered office. "Marcus told me about your situation. HOAs can be a real pain, but they have to follow the law just like everyone else. I'm just trying to figure out where I stand legally. Is what I'm doing considered a business?" Ronald leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Technically, it depends on how you structure it. But here's the thing. You're providing a service that benefits the community and supports education. We work with several non-profits and community programs that do similar work. What makes you different from a church group collecting cans to fund mission trips? That's what I want to know." He pulled out a folder. "I took the liberty of drafting a letter outlining our relationship with you. We consider you a community recycling partner, not a commercial vendor. You process materials that would otherwise end up in landfills, and you do it in an environmentally responsible way. The fact that you donate the proceeds to education makes it even more defensible. Would you be willing to present this to the HOA? Son, I'd be willing to stand in front of the county commissioners if needed. What you're doing is exactly the kind of initiative we want to encourage. Plus, it's good PR for us." He grinned. "Not often we get to be the good guys in a community dispute. Armed with documentation from both the university and the recycling center, I requested a formal hearing with the HOA board. Tennessee law required HOAs to provide residents with an opportunity to contest violations before implementing fines, so they couldn't refuse. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. I spent the week preparing my case like I was going to trial. I made copies of everything, created a presentation showing how much metal I'd recycled over the past 2 years, and calculated the environmental impact of keeping that material out of landfills. I even got statements from 3 neighbors who regularly brought me their scrap metal, describing it as a convenient community service. Thursday arrived faster than I wanted. I showed up at the clubhouse at 6:30 for the 7 o'clock hearing, my arms full of folders and my stomach full of butterflies. The clubhouse was a renovated farmhouse that served as the neighborhood's gathering space, with a main room that could hold about 50 people. Barbara was already there, along with the 4 other board members. Dennis Walsh, the vice president and a retired insurance adjuster. Patricia Mayer, the secretary and a real estate agent. Todd Richardson, the treasurer and an accountant, and Linda Foster, a member-at-large who taught elementary school. They sat behind a long table at the front of the room like judges at a tribunal. I took a seat in the front row, arranging my materials on the chair beside me. A few neighbors had shown up, including my next-door neighbor George, who often brought me old pipes and wire from his renovation projects. Barbara called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. We're here to address the notice of violation issued to Grant Collins of 1247 Oak Ridge Drive regarding unauthorized commercial activity. Mr. Collins, you have 15 minutes to present your case. I stood and approached the table, my mouth dry despite the bottle of water I'd downed in the car. Thank you for hearing me out. I want to clarify that what I do in my garage isn't a commercial business. It's a community recycling program that supports education. I laid out my case methodically, starting with the scholarship fund and showing documentation from Memphis State. I explained how 2 students were currently attending college because of the program, and how 5 more scholarships were planned for the next academic year. Then I presented the letter from Memphis Metal Recycling Center, emphasizing their classification of me as a community partner rather than a commercial vendor. I process an average of 800 pounds of scrap metal per month, I continued. That's material that would otherwise end up in landfills. Neighbors bring me their old pipes, wire, broken appliances, and other metal waste. I sort it, process what needs processing, and transport it to the recycling center. 100% of the proceeds go to the scholarship fund, which is registered as a 501(c)(3) charitable organization. Barbara held up a hand. But you're still operating industrial equipment in a residential area. The noise complaints are legitimate concerns. I operate the Shear between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays only, which is within the noise ordinance guidelines for our county. I checked, and I've brought statements from my immediate neighbors saying they don't find it disruptive. I passed forward the statements from George and 2 other neighbors. Dennis took them and began reading, his expression thoughtful. Patricia leaned forward. Mr. Collins, I appreciate what you're trying to do for education, but rules exist for a reason. If we make an exception for you, what's to stop someone else from opening a woodworking business or an auto repair shop in their garage? The difference is charitable purpose. I'm not making money from this. Every dollar goes to help kids attend college. And I'm willing to work with the board on reasonable restrictions. If the noise is truly a problem, I can adjust my hours or install sound dampening. but shutting down the operation entirely would harm the scholarship fund and take away a convenient recycling option for our neighbors. Todd, the accountant, spoke up for the first time. Can you provide financial records showing that proceeds actually go to the scholarship fund? Absolutely. I'd anticipated this question and pulled out a detailed spreadsheet showing every transaction over the past 18 months. I keep meticulous records. You can see here: scrap delivered to recycling center, payment received, transfer to scholarship fund account. It's all documented. The board members huddled together, speaking in low voices. I returned to my seat, my heart pounding. George gave me a thumbs up from 2 rows back. After 5 minutes of discussion, Barbara straightened and addressed the room. Mr. Collins, the board needs time to review the materials you've provided and consult with our legal counsel. We'll table this matter for 2 weeks and reconvene to make a final decision. In the meantime, you may continue operations, but we strongly encourage you to keep noise to a minimum and consider the concerns of your neighbors. It wasn't the victory I'd hoped for, but it wasn't a defeat either. I gathered my materials and headed home, feeling cautiously optimistic. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo. I continued processing scrap metal but found myself second-guessing every noise, every piece of equipment I used. I installed rubber mats under the shear to dampen vibration and invested in a quieter compressor for my pneumatic tools. I even started a log documenting every time I used the equipment, noting the time, duration, and what I was processing. Marcus called midway through the waiting period with unexpected news. "Hey, Grant, something interesting came up. Our corporate office heard about your situation, and they're impressed with what you're doing. They want to feature your program in their community outreach materials." "Is that okay with you?" "Feature it how?" "Article on the website, maybe a short video. They think it's a great example of grassroots recycling initiatives. Plus, it might help your case with the HOA if you've got corporate backing from a major recycling operation." I agreed, and a week later, Memphis Metal Recycling published an article titled "Local Resident Turns Scrap into Scholarships" on their website and social media. The response was overwhelming. Local news picked up the story, and suddenly, I was getting calls from reporters wanting to know more about the program. Channel 5 News sent a reporter and cameraman to my house on a Tuesday afternoon. The reporter, a young woman named Stephanie Chen, was enthusiastic and asked pointed questions about the HOA situation. "So they're trying to shut you down even though you're funding college scholarships?" She sounded incredulous. "They're concerned about zoning and noise regulations." I understand their position, but I hope we can find a compromise. The segment aired that evening, and my phone started ringing immediately. Neighbors I barely knew called to express support. Someone started a petition online demanding that the HOA leave me alone, which garnered 300 signatures in 48 hours. Even the mayor's office reached out, asking if there was anything they could do to help. Barbara called me directly the next morning, and her tone was distinctly different from our previous interactions. "Mr. Collins, this media attention is creating problems for the board. We're being portrayed as villains when we're simply trying to enforce community standards." "I didn't seek out the media, Barbara. The recycling center published an article, and it took on a life of its own. Well, it's made our position significantly more complicated. The board is meeting tomorrow evening to discuss the matter. Given the public interest, we've decided to hold an open forum where community members can weigh in. I assume you'll be there. I wouldn't miss it." The open forum was scheduled for Friday evening, and the clubhouse was packed. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. I recognized most faces from around the neighborhood, but there were also strangers, probably drawn by the news coverage. Jennifer from Memphis State was there, as was Ronald from the recycling center. Marcus sat near the back, giving me a supportive nod. The board looked distinctly uncomfortable with the turnout. Barbara called the meeting to order, but her usual commanding presence seemed diminished by the crowd. Thank you all for coming. Tonight we're addressing the matter of Grant Collins's recycling operation. We've received significant community feedback on this issue, and we want to hear from residents before making our final decision. She opened the floor for comments, and hands shot up immediately. George was the first to speak. I've lived next door to Grant for 4 years. His equipment makes less noise than my lawnmower. He's providing a service to this community and doing it for a good cause. The HOA should be supporting him, not harassing him. Applause erupted. Barbara's jaw tightened, but she maintained composure. Thank you for your input. Next speaker. A woman I didn't recognize stood up. I don't live in this neighborhood, but I'm here because my daughter received one of Mr. Collins's scholarships last year. She's the first person in our family to attend college. What he's doing changes lives, and you're worried about noise. That's shameful. More applause. The testimonials continued for 30 minutes. Neighbors praised the recycling program. Jennifer spoke about the scholarship fund's impact. Ronald explained how community recycling initiatives benefit everyone. Not a single person spoke in favor of shutting down my operation. Finally, Barbara held up her hands for silence. We appreciate everyone's passion about this issue. The board will now deliberate. They huddled together again, this time for nearly 15 minutes. I could see the tension in their body language, particularly Barbara's rigid posture. When they finally broke apart, it was Dennis, the vice president, who spoke instead of Barbara. After reviewing Mr. Collins's documentation and hearing community feedback, the board has decided to withdraw the violation notice. However, we're implementing specific conditions. The equipment may only be operated between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. on weekdays, and 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturdays. No operations on Sundays. Additionally, Mr. Collins must provide quarterly reports to the board documenting his charitable contributions to ensure the operation remains non-commercial in nature. Relief flooded through me. The conditions were reasonable, actually better than I'd hoped. I can absolutely work with that. Thank you. Barbara looked like she'd bitten into a lemon, but she nodded stiffly. This decision is contingent on your continued compliance with all other HOA regulations and county noise ordinances. Understood. The crowd broke into applause again, and several people came up to shake my hand or pat my back. I felt like I'd won a major battle, and in many ways I had. But Barbara wasn't done with me yet. Over the following weeks, I noticed an uptick in HOA scrutiny of my property. I received a notice because my grass was allegedly half an inch too tall, which was absurd. Another notice claimed my garbage bins were visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though they were in the same spot they'd always been. It was clear that Barbara was trying to find other ways to hassle me. I documented everything meticulously and responded to each notice with photographs and explanations. It was tedious, but I wasn't going to give her ammunition to claim I was a problem resident. Then things took a darker turn. In early October, I received a notice that my HOA dues had increased by $200 per month, effective immediately. The letter cited increased administrative costs and community improvements. When I called to question this, I was told the increase applied only to properties that required additional oversight and documentation. In other words, it applied only to me. I consulted with a real estate attorney named David Zimmerman, who specialized in HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Nashville, and he had a reputation for taking on overzealous homeowner associations. "This is discriminatory," he said after reviewing my documentation. "They can't single out one property owner for fee increases without justification that applies equally to all residents. Do you have the original HOA bylaws and any amendments?" "I have what they gave me when I bought the house." "Get me everything you've got. I also need copies of all notices you've received, your responses, and documentation of the board's decision regarding your recycling operation. If they're retaliating against you for exercising your rights, we can fight this." I provided everything he requested, and David sent a formal letter to the HOA board stating that the fee increase was discriminatory and potentially illegal under Tennessee HOA law. He demanded they rescind it immediately or face legal action. Barbara's response was to call an emergency board meeting and propose a special assessment for equipment-related infrastructure improvements that would apply to my property specifically. The amount, $5,000. That was when I knew this had gone beyond a simple dispute about rules. Barbara was waging a personal vendetta, and she didn't care how ridiculous it made her look. David filed a lawsuit against the HOA in county court, claiming harassment, discrimination, and violation of Tennessee HOA statutes. The suit also requested an injunction preventing them from implementing the special assessment or any other discriminatory fees. The legal process moved slowly, but the court granted a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from collecting the special assessment while the case proceeded. Discovery revealed some interesting facts about the HOA's finances and Barbara's management. It turned out that Barbara had been using HOA funds to pay herself an administrative stipend that wasn't authorized in the bylaws. She'd also hired her brother's landscaping company for community maintenance at rates significantly above market value. While neither of these things was directly related to my case, they painted a picture of someone who saw the HOA as her personal fiefdom. The other board members seemed genuinely shocked by these revelations. Dennis called me privately in November. "Grant, I owe you an apology. I supported Barbara initially because I thought she had the community's best interests at heart. But this has gotten out of hand, and the financial irregularities are deeply concerning. Several board members are discussing removing her from the presidency. I appreciate you telling me. Honestly, I just want to continue my recycling program and live in peace. I think we can make that happen. Can your attorney work with us to settle this case if we make some changes?" I relayed the conversation to David, who was cautiously optimistic. "If they're willing to remove the problematic board member and formally acknowledge your right to continue the recycling operation, we can probably reach a settlement that avoids a lengthy trial." The board held a special meeting in December where they voted 4-1 to remove Barbara as president, with Barbara casting the lone dissenting vote. Dennis became interim president, and the board formally apologized for the discriminatory treatment I'd received. But Barbara wasn't going quietly. She filed her own lawsuit against the board, claiming they'd violated proper procedures in removing her. She also started a campaign to recall the other board members, going door to door with a petition and spreading claims that the board was corrupt and that my recycling operation was actually a front for illegal activities. The accusations were absurd, but they were also damaging. Some neighbors who'd supported me started asking questions. Was I really donating the money? Was the scholarship fund legitimate? The doubt Barbara sowed threatened everything I'd worked for. I decided to fight back with transparency. I created a simple website documenting the scholarship fund, including photos and testimonials from recipients. I posted my quarterly reports to the HOA publicly, showing exactly how much metal I processed and where the money went. I even invited neighbors to tour my operation and see firsthand what I was doing. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Most people appreciated the transparency and felt reassured. But a small contingent, led by Barbara, remained convinced I was somehow scamming the system. Things came to a head in January during the HOA's annual meeting, where new board members would be elected. Barbara was running for reinstatement as president, campaigning on a platform of proper oversight and community standards. Dennis and the other incumbents were running on their record of resolving disputes and managing finances responsibly. The meeting was packed again, and the tension was palpable. Barbara gave a speech accusing the current board of corruption and claiming they'd sold out the community's values to avoid negative publicity. Dennis responded by presenting the financial audit that had uncovered Barbara's unauthorized payments to herself. "The issue isn't about recycling or scholarships or noise," Dennis said. "It's about leadership that serves the community rather than personal interests. We made mistakes in supporting Barbara's overreach against Grant Collins, but we corrected course when we realized what was happening. That's what responsible leadership looks like." The vote wasn't even close. Dennis and the other board members were re-elected by wide margins. Barbara received only 12 votes out of more than 100 cast. She left the meeting in a fury, shouting that the community would regret their decision. 2 weeks later, I was in my garage processing a load of copper wire when a county sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. My heart sank, wondering what Barbara had accused me of now. "Mr. Collins, I'm Deputy Martinez. I need to ask you some questions about Barbara Norton." "What about her?" "She's been reported for making threats against several members of your HOA board. Do you have any knowledge of those threats or any threats she may have made against you?" I thought about the increasingly unhinged messages Barbara had posted in the neighborhood Facebook group, some of which had been directed at me. "She's made some angry posts online, but I haven't taken them as serious threats. We'd like you to document any communications you've received from her, particularly anything that could be construed as threatening or harassing. We're building a case for a restraining order on behalf of the board members." I provided screenshots of Barbara's Facebook messages and emails, some of which were genuinely disturbing in their vitriol. Deputy Martinez thanked me and said they'd be in touch. The restraining order was granted in February, prohibiting Barbara from contacting board members or attending HOA meetings. She violated it almost immediately by showing up at the clubhouse during a board meeting and having to be escorted away by police. That violation led to criminal charges for contempt of court. The situation had spiraled far beyond anything I'd imagined when Barbara first showed up at my garage with her clipboard. In March, Barbara's case went to trial. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Repeated violations of the restraining order, documented harassment of board members and myself, and the financial irregularities from her time as HOA president. The judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Norton, your behavior has gone far beyond disagreement over community policies. You've engaged in harassment, intimidation, and misappropriation of funds. This court finds you guilty of contempt and orders you to serve 30 days in county jail, followed by 2 years probation. Additionally, you are permanently barred from serving in any leadership capacity in the Riverside Heights HOA and must pay restitution for the unauthorized stipends you paid yourself." Barbara's face went pale. Her attorney tried to argue for a lighter sentence, but the judge was firm. Watching her being led away in handcuffs was surreal. I'd never wanted things to escalate to this point, but she'd left everyone no choice. The neighborhood seemed to exhale collectively after Barbara's conviction. The new board, led by Dennis, operated with a completely different philosophy, focused on maintaining property values while respecting residents' rights. They even featured my recycling program in the community newsletter as an example of positive community engagement. Memphis Metal Recycling Center expanded their partnership with me, providing better equipment and even helping transport larger loads. The scholarship fund grew as more people heard about it and made direct donations. By the end of the academic year, we were able to fund 5 full scholarships instead of 2. One warm afternoon in May, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up. A young woman got out, looking nervous but determined. I recognized her from the photos Jennifer had shown me. "Mr. Collins." "I'm Tamara Johnson. I'm one of your scholarship recipients." I wiped my hands and shook hers. "Tamara, it's great to meet you. How's school going?" "That's what I wanted to tell you. I just finished my first year of nursing school with a 4.0 GPA. I made the dean's list." Her eyes were shining with pride. "I couldn't have done any of this without your scholarship. I wanted to thank you in person." My throat tightened with emotion. "You earned it. I just provided an opportunity. You're doing the hard work." "Still, it means everything." My mom cried when we found out about the scholarship because she'd been so worried about me taking on massive debt. "You changed our family's future." After she left, I stood in my garage looking at the metal shear that had caused so much trouble. It was just a machine, a tool for cutting metal. But it represented something larger. The idea that ordinary people could make a difference in their communities, that grief could be transformed into something positive, that persistence in the face of opposition was worthwhile. Sarah would have loved seeing how this all turned out. She'd always believed in the power of education and community. The scholarship fund was my promise to her fulfilled, and no HOA president or bureaucratic red tape had been able to stop it. The following month, Memphis State held their scholarship awards ceremony. I was invited to attend and meet all 5 recipients. They were an impressive group, diverse backgrounds, different majors, but all sharing the same determination to succeed against the odds. David Mitchell, the engineering student, told me he'd been homeless his senior year of high school, sleeping on friends' couches and working 2 jobs while maintaining a scholarship-worthy GPA. "Your scholarship meant I could quit one of those jobs and focus on my studies," he said. "My grades improved immediately. I'm designing a water purification system for my senior project that could help communities in developing countries. None of that would have been possible without this opportunity." Stories like David's reminded me why I'd fought so hard against Barbara and the HOA. It wasn't about my right to operate equipment in my garage or some abstract principle. It was about real people whose lives were genuinely changed by access to education. The local news did a follow-up story in June, checking in on how things had progressed since their initial report. Stephanie Chen came back to interview me, this time bringing footage of the scholarship recipients and their stories. "When we first covered this story, it was about an HOA trying to shut down a recycling operation," Stephanie said to the camera. "But it's always been about so much more than that. It's about community, opportunity, and what happens when one person decides to make a difference." The segment ended with footage of my garage, the metal shear operating smoothly, and a banner I'd hung that reads "Scrap today, scholarships tomorrow." By the end of summer, I'd processed over 12,000 pounds of scrap metal, generating enough funding for 7 scholarships in the upcoming academic year. The program had grown beyond anything I'd imagined, with people from across Memphis dropping off metal for recycling and making direct donations to the fund. The HOA, under Dennis's leadership, had become genuinely supportive. They featured the scholarship program prominently in recruitment materials for prospective home buyers, presenting it as evidence of the community's commitment to positive social impact. Property values in Riverside Heights actually increased, partly due to the positive publicity. In September, the neighborhood threw a celebration marking the second anniversary of the scholarship fund. They held it at the clubhouse, and nearly the entire community showed up. There was food, music, and speeches from scholarship recipients. Jennifer from Memphis State presented me with a plaque recognizing my contributions to education. Dennis took the microphone at one point. "I want to apologize again to Grant for the difficulties our board caused him. We lost sight of what really matters, which is supporting neighbors who are trying to do good in the world. Grant's taught us all a valuable lesson about persistence, generosity, and standing up for what's right. Our community is better because of him." The applause was genuine and heartfelt. Even some of the neighbors who'd initially supported Barbara came up to shake my hand and admit they'd been wrong. As the evening wound down and I was helping clean up, George approached me with a beer and a grin. "You know, when you first moved in and started hauling scrap metal, I thought you were just a little eccentric. I never imagined it would turn into all this." "Neither did I admitted. "I just wanted to honor Sarah's memory and help some kids go to college. The rest kind of happened on its own." "Well, you've made a real difference. Not just for the scholarship kids, but for this whole neighborhood. You showed us what's possible when someone cares enough to fight for something meaningful." I looked around at my neighbors chatting and laughing, at the scholarship recipients sharing their experiences with curious community members, at the supportive environment that had emerged from conflict. It had been a long, difficult road from that morning when Barbara first appeared with her clipboard, but the destination made every battle worthwhile. The metal shear in my garage would keep running, cutting through copper and aluminum and steel, transforming scrap into opportunity. And somewhere, students who might never have had a chance at higher education would be studying, growing, and preparing to make their own differences in the world. That's what community should be about, not enforcing arbitrary rules or maintaining some sterile version of uniformity, but supporting each other in doing good work. It took a fight with an overzealous HOA president to teach us all that lesson, but we'd learned it well. As I drove home that night, I passed my garage and saw the banner hanging above the door. "Scrap today, scholarships tomorrow." It was a simple promise, but one I intended to keep for as long as I was able. Sarah would have approved, and really, that was all that mattered. The legal settlements were finally concluded in October. The HOA formally apologized in writing and agreed to pay my attorney fees. They also revised their bylaws to include explicit protections for charitable activities conducted by residents, ensuring no one else would face the kind of harassment I'd endured. Barbara completed her jail sentence and moved out of Riverside Heights entirely, relocating to another state to live with family. The last I heard, she was banned from serving on any HOA board as part of her probation conditions. Part of me felt sorry for how things ended for her, but she'd made her own choices and faced the appropriate consequences. The recycling program continued to grow. By December, I'd partnered with 3 other neighborhoods in the area to provide recycling services, all feeding into the scholarship fund. What started as a personal project in my garage had become a genuine community initiative spanning multiple subdivisions. Memphis Metal Recycling Center honored me at their annual awards banquet, presenting me with their Community Partner of the Year award. Ronald gave a speech about the importance of grassroots environmental initiatives and how my program exemplified the impact one dedicated person could have. Grant Collins didn't set out to change the world, Ronald said. He just wanted to help some kids go to college and honor his late wife's memory. But by staying committed to that simple goal in the face of significant opposition, he's created something that benefits countless people. That's the kind of community partnership we need more of. The following March, on what would have been Sarah's 52nd birthday, I visited her grave with good news. The scholarship fund had reached a milestone. 25 students had received assistance over 3 years, with a total of over $200,000 awarded. Some were graduating this spring, entering careers in nursing, engineering, teaching, and social work. "We did it, Sarah," I said, kneeling by her headstone. "We're making a real difference. I wish you could meet these kids and hear their stories. You'd be so proud." The wind rustled through the trees surrounding the cemetery, and I imagined it was her way of answering. She'd always been my biggest supporter, the one who believed in my ability to do meaningful work, even when I doubted myself. Fighting the HOA and building the scholarship program had been hard, but it had also been necessary. Some things are worth fighting for. As spring turned to summer, I reflected on everything that had happened over the past 2 years. What started as a simple dispute over equipment noise had revealed deeper truths about community, charity, and the importance of standing up for what matters. Barbara's attempt to shut down my recycling operation had backfired spectacularly, instead bringing attention and support that allowed the scholarship program to flourish beyond my initial dreams. The metal shear still hissed and hummed in my garage most weekdays, cutting through scrap that would become opportunity for deserving students. The sound that Barbara once called a nuisance had become the soundtrack of hope for families across our county. And every time I processed a load of metal, every time I delivered it to the recycling center, every time I transferred funds to the scholarship account, I thought about Sarah and the promise I'd made her. I thought about Tamara and David and all the other students whose lives had been changed. I thought about standing in front of that packed clubhouse, defending something I believed in against people who wanted to shut it down for arbitrary reasons. In the end, persistence and truth had won. The community rallied around what was right. The legal system worked as it should. And a small operation in a suburban garage continued transforming scrap metal into scholarships, one load at a time, proving that ordinary people doing good work can overcome extraordinary obstacles when they refuse to give up. That's the real story, the one that matters more than any dispute about noise ordinances or HOA regulations. It's about purpose, community, and the difference one person can make when they commit to something larger than themselves. The metal shear might have been the catalyst, but the real power came from refusing to let bureaucratic opposition stop good work from happening. And that work continues, day after day, one piece of scrap at a time, building futures and honoring memories, and proving that sometimes the most unlikely tools can create the most meaningful change.